The October rain fell in sheets against the windows of my modest apartment, each drop racing toward the sill like tears that refused to land. I sat cross-legged on my worn, second-hand sofa, the kind you find at estate sales, still holding the shape of a stranger's spine, and stared at my phone screen with the detached fascination of someone watching their own life collapse in real time. The photograph had arrived at 3:47 p.m., which I would later learn was significant, not because the time mattered, but because it marked the exact moment I stopped being Evelyn Albright, the forgotten daughter, and became something else entirely. My father, Arthur Albright, stood with his arm wrapped proprietorially around my stepmother, Serafina. She wore an enormous sun hat that could have doubled as a satellite dish, the kind of accessory that screamed, "I have never worried about money a day in my life." Her smile was the smile of a woman who has successfully convinced herself that cruelty is merely realism. Next to them stood Willow, my half-sister, 2 years my junior and approximately 40 times more photogenic. She held an enormous coral-colored cocktail adorned with the kind of garnish that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Behind them, the turquoise water of Biscayne Bay glittered like stolen jewelry, the stolen jewelry being a rather apt metaphor for the entire scene. The caption had been posted by Willow just hours before, which meant they hadn't even bothered to wait until I was safely asleep to celebrate their freedom from me. "Happy 29th to our wonderful Ev. We're celebrating big for her down here in Miami. The best family trip ever. Palm tree 2 hearts, #soblist, #family first." The irony was so precise, so deliberately cruel, that it felt almost artistic. They had used my birthday, my actual specific birthday, as the cover story for their escape. They had celebrated my existence by celebrating their absence from it. They had turned abandonment into a hashtag. I had spent the previous 3 days waiting. That's what I had done instead of celebrating being alive for 29 years. I had waited by my phone like some pathetic, hopeful creature, expecting my father's voice to come through the line, steady and apologetic, saying something fathers are supposed to say. Instead, I had received a series of increasingly frantic voicemails, each one more performative in its stress than the last. "Evelyn, the firm is drowning." His voice had cracked with the kind of theatrical desperation that only wealthy men can muster. "I wish I could celebrate with you, but Legacy Holdings is facing an unprecedented crisis. The creditors are circling. We simply cannot afford even a small dinner out. I need you to have a quiet, reflective birthday at home. I'm handling something catastrophic here. Your mother would understand." He always invoked my mother when he needed sympathy. She had been dead for 8 years. I set the phone down on the wooden side table, the same table where I had not bothered to light the cheap birthday candles I'd purchased from a discount grocery store, and I allowed myself to feel the full weight of the moment, not the weight of the betrayal itself. I had lived with that for a decade. This weight was different. This was the weight of clarity. This was the moment when the fog of hope finally lifted and revealed the landscape beneath it, barren, hostile, and entirely mine to traverse. My name is Evelyn Catherine Albright. I am 29 years old, and I have spent the last decade learning exactly how invaluable I am to my family, which is to say, I have learned that my value exists only in proportion to my usefulness and my silence. I am the daughter of Arthur Albright, age 57, owner and president of Legacy Holdings, a real estate development firm with offices in 3 states. The company should have been my future. My mother, his first wife, had built the foundations of Legacy Holdings before she died of cancer. She was brilliant visionary and entirely dependent on my father's business acumen to execute her ideas. After she passed, Arthur married Serafina within 18 months. Serafina had no children, no career, and no discernible talents beyond the ability to spend money and deploy weaponized disappointment. Together, They had worked methodically and deliberately to rewrite the history of my family. They had told me repeatedly in that particular tone of voice parents use when they want a lie to stick that I was too delicate for the business, too sensitive for harsh truths, too unskilled for anything beyond filing paperwork and managing accounts that they never bothered to audit because they didn't believe I was competent enough to steal from them. They had elevated Willow instead. Willow, who was lovely and charming and completely incapable of turning on a computer without calling technical support. Willow, who had never read a profit and loss statement in her life. Willow, who was the capable heir. But here is what my family did not understand about me. I had spent those 8 years of silence learning something far more valuable than any lesson they could have taught me. I had learned mathematics. I had learned systems. I had learned that power is not given. It is taken carefully and strategically from the people who believe themselves too important to lose it. I stood slowly, my knees cracking with the stiffness of someone who had been sitting for hours in the same position. My apartment was small, perhaps 800 square feet of worn hardwood floors and secondhand furniture, but it was mine in a way that the Blackwood estate, my family's sprawling mansion, would never be mine. I walked to my bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror above the sink. My eyes were red, but not wet. There were no tears left in me. My family had discovered long ago that tears made me seem too emotional, and crying had become another tool they used to dismiss me. But I had learned to stop. I had learned that dry eyes and a steady voice were far more effective weapons than any amount of desperation could ever be. I whispered to my reflection, though I doubt I believed it at the time. Not anymore. The game ends now. 5 years ago, my maternal grandmother, Lilith Catherine Hartwell, a woman who had more financial acumen in her little finger than Arthur possessed in his entire narcissistic being, had passed away quietly in her sleep. She was 93 years old, and she had been the only person in my family who had ever truly seen me. When the will was read, my father had delivered the news to me personally, sitting across from me in his leather office chair at Legacy Holdings, his face arranged in an expression of practiced sympathy. "Your grandmother wanted to leave you something," he had said, his tone suggesting this was devastating news. But unfortunately, her assets were depleted decades ago. She had to use them to shore up Legacy Holdings during that rough patch in the early 2000s. You understand, I'm sure. Family business comes first. I had been 24 years old. I had believed him. What I had not understood at the time was that my grandmother was considerably cleverer than my father, and she had anticipated his particular brand of dishonesty. Before she died, she had done something that would only become clear to me years later. She had left me a single object, a small black leather box, hidden behind a loose floorboard in my childhood bedroom. That bedroom was in a house called the Red Maple House, a Victorian cottage on the edge of the family property, where I had lived with my mother before my father's marriage to Serafina. After my mother died, the Red Maple House had been sold to a developer, supposedly emptied of all its contents. But my grandmother had been thorough. It had taken me 3 years of searching, calling old contractors, visiting the new owner's house with increasingly creative excuses, before I finally located that box. The new owners, an elderly couple named the Hendersons, had been renovating and had found it when they replaced the floorboards in the upstairs bedroom. When they opened it for me, with the kind of gentle curiosity that only people of genuine kindness possess, I found 3 things inside: a letter from my grandmother, a photograph of her standing beside my mother as a young woman, and a small silver key attached to a ribbon. The letter read, "My dearest Evelyn, if you are reading this, then I have gone to wherever grandmothers go when their work on earth is done. And if you're reading this, then you have already begun to suspect that your father is precisely the kind of man I always knew he was. I will not tell you what to do with what I'm giving you. But I will tell you this. I have watched your mind work since you were small. I have seen how you calculate, how you observe, how you understand systems that other people cannot perceive. Your mother had this same gift, and I am giving you the tools to use it. The key will unlock a private safe deposit box at Westbrook Trust Bank. Inside, you will find the original bond deed for a life insurance policy, a policy that your father has been searching for desperately, a policy worth more than $4 million. It was set up by my mother, your great-grandmother, and the payout is triggered upon the death of Arthur's father, your grandfather. Your grandfather is still alive, though he is very old and very ill. I have also arranged for certain documents to be kept in a secure location outside of your family's control. These documents prove that your father liquidated my trust illegally decades ago, using money that should have been yours. He has lied about this for years, and he will continue to lie about it until he dies. I do not give you this information so that you will destroy him, Evelyn. I give it to you so that you will never again have to wonder if you are worth less than his comfort. Love, Grandmother Lilith. I had read that letter approximately 400 times. I had memorized it. I had wept over it, alone in my tiny apartment, in the dark hours when my family's opinions still had power over me. But gradually, as I moved through my mid-20s, something had shifted inside me. The grief had not diminished, but it had crystallized. It had become something useful. I had spent the years between that discovery and now building my own foundation. Using the name Lilith as my mother's maiden name, I had created a sophisticated network of shell corporations and anonymous business entities. I called the primary entity Garnet Management, a reference to the deep red stone that my grandmother had loved, and I had built it into a six-figure financial consultancy specializing in the untangling of real estate trusts. The work had come through referrals only. I never advertised. I never appeared in person. I was a voice on the phone, a name on letterhead, a brilliant mystery that solved the impossible financial puzzles that wealthy people created for themselves. My clients, corporate funds, investment groups, private equity firms, had no idea that the person behind Garnet Management was a 28-year-old woman sitting in a one-bedroom apartment in a city 90 miles away from her family. They had no idea because I had made certain they would never know. Using this network and the legitimate connections I had built through Garnet Management, I had spent the last 2 years studying my father's financial empire with the precision of a scientist studying an organism under a microscope. I had accessed records that were technically private. I had employed a network of researchers and financial analysts who thought they were working for a corporation, not for a woman with a very personal grudge. What I had discovered made my blood run cold. My father's story about unprecedented financial stress was partially true, but it was not true in the way he claimed. Legacy Holdings itself was stable, profitable, even. But Arthur Albright himself was drowning in a debt so old and so vast that it made my grandmother's warnings seem almost gentle. His father, my grandfather, Thomas Albright, had been a successful businessman in his own right. But in the 1970s, he had become involved with organized crime figures. Not intentionally, at first. He had simply made an investment that had seemed legitimate, and then gradually he had realized he had invested in money laundering operations. By the time he understood what he had done, he had already been fully enmeshed. The debt that resulted from his attempt to extract himself, a debt created through threats and violence, through the kind of financial pressure that only criminal enterprises can apply, had been astronomical. Thomas Albright had managed to keep this secret for nearly 50 years. He had made payments quietly using his business accounts. And when he could no longer manage the payments himself, he had passed the debt on to his son. Arthur Albright had inherited his father's criminal obligation along with his legitimate business. The debt was approximately $23 million, growing monthly due to compounding interest and late fees. This explained everything. This explained why Arthur was cutting his daughter's birthday dinner. This explained why he was constantly stressed, constantly searching for hidden assets, constantly frantic about growth opportunities that never materialized. He was servicing a debt that could never be repaid, a debt that would destroy him the moment it became public knowledge. And he needed the deed. Specifically, he needed the deed to my grandmother's life insurance policy, because that policy, when triggered by my grandfather's death, would pay out $4 million. Enough to make a significant dent in the debt. Enough to buy him another year or two of desperate survival. He needed that money more than he had ever needed anything in his life. And it was mine. The morning after I discovered the Miami photographs, I made a phone call. "Philip," I said, my voice steady and businesslike, "it's Evelyn." Philip Vance was my trusted attorney, a man who had worked with Garnet Management for 3 years and had never actually met me in person. He thought I was a wealthy widow in her 50s, investing her late husband's estate. He had no reason to suspect otherwise. "Evelyn, good morning," he replied. "What can I do for you?" "I need you to purchase something for me," I said, quietly and immediately. "I need you to acquire the mortgage note for a property called the Blackwood Estate, located in Westchester County. The mortgage is held by a small investment trust called Predatory Capital Group. I want you to buy the note using a shell corporation. The terms of the mortgage must remain absolutely identical to the original terms. I want that note in my control by the end of the week." There was a pause. "That's quite a specific request," Philip said carefully. "Are you looking to foreclose? Because I should warn you that." "I'm looking to own," I corrected him. "Own the debt. I mean, not the property. Not yet. I'll instruct you when, and if I want to take further action." "Understood," Philip said. "Give me the details and I'll handle it." The Blackwood Estate was the house my father had purchased 5 years ago, after marrying Serafina. It was a sprawling, pretentious mansion that sat on 15 acres of carefully manicured grounds. The mortgage was enormous, approximately $4 million, and the terms were brutal. The lender was known for its aggressive collection practices and its zero-tolerance policy for late payments. A single missed payment triggered an acceleration clause that made the entire principal due immediately. This was perfect. The property taxes, the insurance, the upkeep, the household staff, all of it cost a small fortune to maintain. My father was paying approximately $35,000 a month in mortgage payments alone, money he was scraping together from Legacy Holdings operating accounts by cutting expenses everywhere else. Money he was finding partly by lying to his employees about profitability. Money he was finding by not celebrating his daughter's birthday. Over the next 3 weeks, while I waited for Philip to complete the purchase, I set about gathering the final pieces of information I would need. I learned that my sister, Willow, had recently been promoted to a position she was completely unqualified for, Director of Operations. This meant she was now responsible for approving all expense reports and reviewing all payment authorizations. It also meant she was responsible for ensuring that the mortgage payment was made on time each month. I learned that Willow was terrible at details. She was the kind of person who approved everything that sounded urgent and didn't read past the first paragraph of any email. She was the kind of person who could be panicked into making bad decisions. I learned that the mortgage payment on the Blackwood Estate was due on the 15th of each month, and that it had to clear the account by midnight, or the acceleration clause would be triggered. I learned that Arthur was planning to take a weekend trip to see his brother Alastair, a man he respected and trusted, in 2 weeks' time. This was significant because it meant he would be out of the office when the crisis hit, and I learned that my grandfather, the man who had inherited and perpetuated the criminal debt, was in hospice care, dying slowly of heart disease, with perhaps 6 months to live at most. The timeline was suddenly, urgently clear. When my grandfather died, the life insurance policy would pay out. The moment that money was in Arthur's hands, he would use it to make a massive payment on the criminal debt. He would buy himself another year or two of survival. But if I moved quickly, if I moved decisively, I could ensure that he never received that money. I could ensure that my grandfather's death, instead of saving Arthur, would destroy him. I had approximately 3 weeks to set everything in motion. On the morning of October 23rd, I received confirmation from Philip that the mortgage note had been purchased successfully. The shell corporation that now owned the Blackwood Estates mortgage was so layered in corporate structures and legal entities that even a forensic accountant would have trouble tracing it back to me. The terms of the mortgage remained identical. From the outside, nothing had changed. From the inside, everything had. 2 days later, I executed the next phase of my plan. Using Garnet Management's resources and a network of contractors I had cultivated specifically for this purpose, I created a perfectly legitimate-looking invoice. The invoice was from a property contractor named Coastal Structural Repairs, and it detailed a massive, supposedly emergency foundation repair at one of the rental properties that Legacy Holdings managed. The invoice was for $20,000 payable immediately, and it included all the technical language and official documentation that would make it appear absolutely genuine. It looked like a document that had been created by a company that had just discovered a catastrophic structural problem that, if not immediately addressed, could result in tenant injuries and massive liability. The invoice was sent via email directly to Willow's work address, with a frantic follow-up email from a panicked contractor demanding immediate payment. The subject line read, "Urgent, foundation failure, immediate payment required or property condemned." I knew what would happen. Willow would see the word emergency and the high dollar amount, and she would panic. She would not read carefully. She would not verify the contractor. She would authorize payment from the general operating account immediately because delaying payment on a genuine emergency could result in liability. The money was gone within 4 hours. This money had been earmarked for the mortgage payment on the Blackwood estate. The morning of the 28th, Arthur called me, his voice tight with controlled rage. "Evelyn, I need you to understand what just happened," he said, his tone suggesting this was somehow my fault, even though I had done nothing. "Your sister authorized a payment of $20,000 to a contractor who may not even exist. The operating account is now empty. We have 5 business days to make the mortgage payment on the house, and we don't have the funds." "That's terrible," I said, and I meant it. My voice was soft, sympathetic, the voice of a daughter who cared. "Did you verify that the contractor exists?" "I'm in the middle of trying to do that now," he said. "But Evelyn, I need to know, did your grandmother ever hide any cash? Any emergency funds? Any bearer bonds or short-term assets that might not be in the formal trust documents?" Here it was, the question I had been waiting for. "I don't know," I said, and I was being truthful. My grandmother's emergency funds were not hidden in the way he meant. They were legitimate, documented, and entirely mine. But, Dad, I remember grandmother being very concerned about something before she died. She talked about old family papers, about insurance documents. She mentioned something about a deed, something important. "A deed," he repeated, his voice changing. "What kind of deed?" "I'm not sure," I said. She was rambling, and she seemed confused. "But I've been thinking about it. I wonder if there might be something in the old warehouse, in those boxes of documents that nobody's looked at in years." The warehouse, the storage facility where Legacy Holdings kept old company documents and records from decades past. My father had been there multiple times in the last 6 months, searching desperately for something his documents indicated should exist, but had never been able to find. "Would you be willing to look?" he asked, and I could hear the desperation threading through his voice. "You have the best memory for that kind of thing. Your grandmother trusted you." "Of course," I said. "I'll go tomorrow." That night, I drove to the warehouse in the industrial district. I had been there before, years ago, when I was pretending to help my father with some business research. I had memorized the layout. I had memorized where the old records were kept. I had memorized where the safe was, the old, dusty safe where my grandmother had once kept her personal papers before she had moved everything to Westbrook Trust Bank. I moved through the warehouse like a ghost, my footsteps echoing off the concrete floors. I found the safe exactly where I remembered it. I opened it using a combination my grandmother had written in her letter. Inside, I found files and documents spanning decades. I took out one specific, ancient envelope, faded and yellowed with age. I took a different envelope, one filled with nothing but an old grocery list and a photograph of my grandmother as a young woman, and marked it with a cryptic L.A. in the corner using a fountain pen I had brought specifically for this purpose. I placed the marked envelope in the safe, prominently displayed, on a shelf where my father would be sure to find it. And I placed the genuine multi-million-dollar life insurance bond deed into my bag. The deed that could have saved his life would instead save my own. 3 days passed. The mortgage payment due date was now 72 hours away, and my father still did not have the funds to make it. On the 29th, he took Willow with him to the warehouse to search. I followed them, parking a block away, waiting. I had equipped myself with a key to the side entrance. I waited until I saw them disappear into the main building. Then I slipped inside. I moved silently to the safe room and retrieved the marked envelope, the decoy. I took it directly to my father's office at Legacy Holdings and placed it on his desk, conspicuously positioned like a breadcrumb on a forest path. When he returned to his office that afternoon, he found it exactly where I had left it. The moment he opened that envelope and saw only an old grocery list and a photograph, his mind created the narrative I intended. He didn't think false clue. He thought puzzle. He thought code. He thought his brilliant, paranoid father might have hidden the real information in plain sight, encoded it in grocery items and faded photographs. He became obsessed with deciphering the grocery list. Butter, eggs, milk, bread, chicken. Did these mean something? Had his father used the items as a code? Was there a pattern? He spent hours trying to decode something that was entirely meaningless. Meanwhile, the mortgage payment deadline arrived. At 11:47 p.m. on October 31st, the payment was not made. The automated system registered the default. The investment trust, the trust now controlled by me, received the notification according to its zero-tolerance policy and by automated timer. At exactly 12:01 a.m. on November 1st, my attorney Philip received an automated instruction and prepared the paperwork for acceleration. The mortgage note, which had been a monthly obligation, suddenly became due in its entirety. The entire $4 million was now due immediately. My father would receive the formal notice the next morning. The phone call came at dawn on November 1st. I knew it would. I was sitting in my apartment, coffee going cold in my hands, when my father's name appeared on my screen. "Evelyn, something is terribly wrong," he said, and I could hear genuine panic in his voice for the first time. "The investment company is demanding the full principal on the house. All of it. for $1 million. By law, they have the right because we missed the payment, but they're being unreasonable." "Dad," I interrupted gently, "that's actually standard in real estate notes. They call the full principal if you default. It's in the contract." "I know it's in the contract," he snapped. "I need you to think. I need you to use that brilliant mind of yours. Where else could Lilith have hidden assets? What if the deed isn't in the warehouse? What if you haven't looked in the right place? I'll keep looking, I promised, but I didn't look. Instead, I activated the next phase of my plan. I had spent months researching my father's other debts, the legitimate debts that existed outside of the criminal obligation passed down from his father. 3 major creditors had been circling Arthur for years: business debts, loans against company property, contractual obligations that had gone unpaid. These creditors had been patient, but their patience was reaching an end. Using Garnet Management's resources and a network of financial brokers, I began purchasing these debts. I bought them at a slight discount because they were aging, because the creditors were eager to clear them from their books. And by November 3rd, I controlled approximately $2 million in unsecured personal debt owed by my father. That evening, Philip sent a carefully worded letter to my father on official Garnet Management letterhead, representing the creditor consortium. The letter was a demand for immediate, full repayment of all notes, the mortgage, the 3 personal debts, and a small bridge loan I had quietly acquired over the past weeks. The total demanded $6,400,000. My father received the letter on a Friday afternoon. I knew he received it because he called me immediately, his voice hoarse and broken. "Evelyn, they're trying to destroy me. They've coordinated. I think someone is deliberately attacking. Multiple creditors, all demanding payment within 30 days, all threatening legal action simultaneously. This is coordinated. Someone is orchestrating this." "Dad," I said quietly, "why would someone do that?" "I don't know," he cried. "I don't know, and I can't figure it out, and I can't stop it, and the house is going to be auctioned if I can't find that deed." He was right. The house would be auctioned, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Arthur Albright broke on a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week of November. I had prepared for this. I had anticipated that desperate people do desperate things, and I had positioned myself to be his last, best hope. I had dropped breadcrumbs, anonymous comments in his hearing about how I was doing so well financially, how I seemed to have resources, how I was unexpectedly clever. He came to my apartment without calling first. This was the moment I had orchestrated. My father, a man who had never visited my home, standing on my doorstep, looking smaller than I remembered him. His expensive suit was wrinkled. His hair, usually perfectly styled, was disheveled. His eyes had the frantic, hunted look of a man who had finally encountered a problem that money and manipulation could not solve. "I need your help," he said, and for the first time, I heard something in his voice that I had never heard before: genuine humility. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like something harder to name. I let him inside. He looked around my small apartment, taking in the modest furniture and careful organization. And for the first time in his life, I saw him truly look at the life I had built. I saw him trying to reconcile this reality, that his daughter lived simply, carefully, meticulously, with the narrative he had constructed about me. "Your grandmother left me something," I said, and I went to my bedroom and retrieved the small black leather box. I set it on the coffee table between us. "The deed." He breathed, and I watched his face transform with hope. "Yes," I said, "but first, I need you to tell me the truth." And then I did something that surprised both of us. I told him what I knew. I told him about the liquidated trust. I told him about the documents I had found in the warehouse. I told him about his father's criminal debt, which he had been secretly servicing for nearly 30 years. I told him that I had known the truth for months, and I had let him suffer anyway. He paled. His hands shook. He sat down heavily on my sofa. "How did you?" he started. "I'm not stupid, Dad," I said quietly. "You've treated me like I was stupid my entire life. You told me I didn't have the mind for business, that I was too delicate for harsh truths. But I have spent the last decade learning how to read financial systems better than you ever could. I learned how to trace money, how to follow lies to their source. And I learned that you stole from me. You stole my grandmother's legacy. You lied about it for 10 years. And you've been lying about everything else since. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply sat there, looking at the box. If you give me the deed, he said hoarsely, I can save the house. I can pay off the policy. I can survive this. Yes, I said. You could. I opened the box. I slowly, deliberately pulled out the genuine life insurance bond deed. The real one, worth more than $4 million, sealed with official stamps and notary signatures. I held it up so he could see the face value printed in elegant, impossible numbers. His eyes filled with tears. This isn't for you, Dad. I said, this is what Lilith saved for me. You spent 10 years hunting a ghost because you never believed I was smart enough to hold the key. You thought I was decorative, useful only for bookkeeping and silence. The sound of a distant siren began to grow louder. What did you do? He asked suddenly, understanding beginning to dawn. I told the truth to the people who needed to know it. I said, I reported the tax evasion associated with the offshore account your wife mentioned to me. The district attorney's office has frozen it. You have nothing left, Dad. No house. No business. No secret fund. He stood up unsteadily, moving toward the window. Outside, a sheriff's car was pulling up to the curb. The foreclosure, I said quietly. It starts today. They're going to serve the eviction notice. You have 30 days before the house goes to auction. He turned to me, and I saw something break in his face. Not his composure, that had already fractured weeks ago, but something deeper. Something that looked like the moment a person realizes that the narrative they have constructed for their entire life was fiction. I loved your mother, he said, and it was such a non sequitur that I almost didn't understand him. I did love her, and I loved you in my way. I didn't know how to love you when you started becoming so independent. I didn't know how to. You didn't have to hurt me to feel like you had power. I interrupted. That was a choice you made, Dad. Every single time. That was a choice. The knock on the door came at exactly that moment. The timing so perfect, it seemed choreographed. The sheriff's deputy arrived with his stack of official papers, and my father, in his wrinkled, expensive suit, looked at me one last time before opening the door. I had won. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt tired. The foreclosure on the Blackwood estate was the first domino. Everything that followed fell into place with the inevitability of a carefully constructed edifice collapsing under its own weight. Willow, desperate to prove her worth to a suddenly irrational mother, decided to handle the tenant disputes herself. She went to one of the rental properties to confront a man who had been 2 months behind on rent. The tenant, a man in his 60s named Robert Martinez, had seen Willow's Instagram post celebrating the Miami trip just hours before their confrontation. He had watched her smile from an expensive resort while he struggled to pay his own bills. He wasn't the type to hold back his opinions. Rich girl, living off daddy's money, he called her, his voice harsh with the particular anger that comes from financial desperation. Celebrating luxury while people like me can't afford basic housing. How does that feel? Willow had never been confronted directly before. She had never faced anger that came from actual hardship as opposed to the performative grievances of her wealthy peers. Something in her broke. She pushed him. He fell. His wrist shattered against the arm of a chair. By evening, she was being arraigned on assault charges. By the next morning, the media, always hungry for a story about entitlement crushing into consequences, had made the connection between the spoiled heiress and the foreclosure of her family's mansion. The narrative wrote itself, a family of fraudsters finally exposed. Arthur spent that evening alone at the Blackwood estate, the house that had been his fortress and his cage. Serafina, faced with the reality of financial ruin and public scandal, did what she did best. She abandoned him. She left in the middle of the night, taking her jewelry and cash, leaving behind a scathing note that ended their marriage and blamed him for everything. She didn't file for divorce. She simply vanished, as if she had never existed except as a performance, which, of course, she had been. The public auction of the Blackwood estate was scheduled for a Monday morning in early December. The local news outlets sent crews. The financial blogs wrote speculative pieces about the empire in collapse. The real estate speculators gathered, circling like sharks, hoping to snap up a piece of the family's humiliation. Philip, representing a completely separate corporate entity that no one could trace back to Garnet Management, purchased the house with ease. No one else could approach his bid. The debt I controlled was simply too substantial, the asking price too high. The hammer came down at 10:47 a.m. The house was officially mine, though that fact would remain carefully hidden behind layers of corporate shell games. Ownership, I had learned, was not the same as visibility. The real estate agents shook hands. The media took photographs, and no one noticed that the victory belonged to the invisible daughter. That evening, I received a call from the sheriff's department. The final eviction notice had been served. My father had 24 hours to vacate the premises. The morning of December 12th, I drove to the Blackwood estate for what I knew would be the last time. The winter sun was pale and cold, the kind of light that makes everything look smaller than it should be. I parked my car, a practical, modest model that had never been designed to impress anyone, down the street. I walked up the pristine, winding driveway that I had walked up so many times as a child. When this house had represented the future I was being prepared for, the future I was being systematically excluded from. Arthur was sitting on the front steps, surrounded by hastily packed boxes. They were cardboard boxes, not the leather luggage of a man leaving on vacation. They contained the remainder of his life: clothes, books, photographs, the physical evidence of a 60-year-old man's existence, compressed into containers designed for moving. He looked up at me, and for a moment, his face transformed with something that looked like hope. "Evelyn," he called out. "You came. Did you find something? The deed. Evelyn, please tell me you found the deed." I walked up to him slowly, deliberately. I didn't speak. I simply looked at him. This man who had stolen my inheritance, mocked my intelligence, abandoned me on my birthday, and expected me to save him. "Dad," I said, my voice steady and quiet, "there is no deed for you. You liquidated the trust 10 years ago. You stole my inheritance. You lied to my face about it for a decade, and I let you search for a ghost while I took back what was mine." He paled, his eyes wide with the specific clarity that comes only when a person finally understands they have been outmaneuvered. I pulled the small black leather box from my bag, the same box he had dismissed for years as containing nothing but knickknacks. I opened it slowly, deliberately, and pulled out the genuine multi-million-dollar life insurance bond deed. The official seals gleamed in the winter light. The face value printed on the document seemed to glow with the weight of its own significance. "This is what Lilith saved for me," I said. "You've spent months hunting a ghost because you couldn't imagine that I might be smarter than you, that I might have learned things you never bothered to teach me, that I might have figured out how to read a system and dismantle it from the inside." The sound of the sheriff's car, approaching, began to build in the distance. "I'm sorry," he said, and something in his voice suggested he almost meant it. "I'm sorry for how I treated you. I'm sorry for—" I stopped him simply by turning away. I heard the sheriff's car pull up to the gate. I heard the officer's footsteps on the gravel. I heard my father stand up slowly, his old bones creaking with the sound of defeat. I walked past both of them, down the driveway, without looking back. My victory wasn't the sound of the sheriff's siren. It wasn't the sight of my father's face when he realized his daughter had orchestrated his destruction. It wasn't even the deed itself, though that was certainly valuable. My victory was the quiet knowledge that I had moved through his world, learned its rules, and rewritten them according to my own design. My victory was the realization that I had never needed him to validate my intelligence. I had simply needed to believe in myself enough to act on what I had always known to be true. The driveway crunched beneath my feet as I walked away. Behind me, a uniformed officer was speaking to my father in official tones. Behind me, the Blackwood estate was preparing to become a hollow monument to a family's hubris. But I was already gone. The next morning, I received a package from my attorney Philip. The sale is finalized. His note read, "The deed to the Blackwood estate is officially transferred. What would you like me to do with the property?" I looked at the document, the one that had been my father's obsession, and I made a decision that surprised me slightly. I didn't sell the house. I didn't keep it. Instead, I transferred it to a charitable trust designed to provide affordable housing to people experiencing financial hardship. The irony was precise. The house built on lies would now serve people who had been destroyed by other people's greed. Using the funds from the life insurance bond deed, money that would eventually be released upon my grandfather's death in late December, I established a small, anonymous foundation. The foundation provided scholarships to young women who were being excluded from family businesses. It provided legal support for people being financially abused by family members. It existed to do what my grandmother had tried to do for me, provide a way out. I didn't announce this. I didn't take credit. The foundation had no public face, and my name appeared nowhere in its documentation. My father called me once in the weeks following the eviction. His voice was broken, smaller. "I'm in an apartment now," he said. "Just one room. Willow is in jail pending trial. Serafina has filed for divorce from a distance. She's in Cabo San Lucas, I think. Alistair won't return my calls. I don't know what to do with myself." "I don't either," I said, and I hung up. He tried reaching me again. I didn't answer. He sent emails. I didn't respond. After a while, he stopped trying. This silence, backed by my financial security, my knowledge of his secrets, my power over his remaining assets, was the most satisfying form of revenge I could have imagined. It's June now, and I'm sitting on the porch of a house I purchased with my own money, a house I chose carefully, brick by brick, without any family input or family legacy attached to it. The mortgage is manageable. The neighborhood is quiet. There's a garden, and I'm learning to grow things. My grandfather died on December 27th. His death triggered the life insurance bond deed exactly as grandmother Lilith had arranged. The $4 million hit my account in early January. I watched the number appear on my screen, a number that represented freedom, that represented validation, that represented the tangible proof that my grandmother had believed in me all along. I didn't use the money to become like them. I used it to become myself. Arthur filed for bankruptcy in February. His debt was so substantial that even liquidating what remained of legacy holdings wouldn't cover it all. The company was sold to a venture capital group that immediately dismantled it and sold the parts. The real estate empire that my mother had built, that I was supposed to inherit, that had been the narrative framework of my entire childhood, ceased to exist. Willow took a plea deal. She's in minimum security prison now, serving an 18-month sentence for assault. The irony is that prison might be the first place where she actually has to earn her own way, where her charm and her family name mean nothing. Serafina married a banker in Cabo. I saw it in a society column. She looked happy, which is probably more than she deserved. My father is living in that one-room apartment. He has a job now, from what I've heard. Something in the service industry, something that requires no connections, no credentials beyond basic competence. He is, for the first time in his life, untethered from the systems that once sustained him. I haven't forgiven him. I don't think I ever will. But I have achieved something better than forgiveness. I have achieved indifference. He no longer has the power to hurt me because he has nothing I need and no position from which to leverage my emotions. My friend Marcus, the original family lawyer who had been sent the anonymous package I prepared, called me once in March. He had put the pieces together. He knew, though he didn't say so directly, "You're your grandmother's granddaughter." He said, simply, she would be proud. I don't know if that's true, but I know that I'm proud of myself, which is something I never would have said 5 years ago. People often ask me if I regret what I did. They want to know if the revenge felt empty once I achieved it. They want to know if I experienced the hollowness that popular wisdom promises comes with vengeance. Here's what I know. I didn't destroy my father out of anger. Anger fades. Anger is corrosive, but it's temporary. I destroyed him out of clarity. I destroyed him because I finally understood that he was not a figure to fear, but a system to dismantle. And I had the capability to dismantle it. Do I regret it? No. Do I feel empty? Sometimes. But the emptiness is not because I achieved my revenge. The emptiness is because I realized that revenge, no matter how perfectly orchestrated, cannot actually repair the past. It cannot bring my mother back. It cannot return the years I spent doubting myself. It cannot give me back the birthday celebrations I never had. What revenge can do, what it actually did for me, is clear the rubble. It removed the people and the systems that were preventing me from building something new. It created space. And in that space, I've built something that matters more than revenge ever could. I've built a life that is entirely my own. If you've made it this far, you understand. Respect is non-negotiable. Your worth isn't defined by their seating chart or by who they chose to believe first. My story proves that cold silence can be a surgical weapon, and that meticulous patience can be power. The family who dismissed me as too emotional never saw the structural destruction I was quietly preparing to unleash. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who's been gaslit into invisibility. Tell them, your boundaries don't make you difficult. Your survival makes you extraordinary. Your worth was never in question. It was only ever waiting to be remembered. The revolution happens when you decide to write your own ending. Have you ever had to prove your worth to a family that underestimated you? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.